So as we're maybe a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, I'm Jason Breed. I lead partnerships and alliances worldwide for Crown Peak. And I also happen to be the chairman of the board for the Cloud Software Association. So welcome everybody to this Cloud Software Association event. And a couple of housekeeping items. We'll try and take questions as they come in. And I'll try and monitor that somehow with screen share and all that built in. But Stacy, also, if you see anything, feel free to jump in and let us know that we've got questions if we miss them. We'll try and grab those as we go. Also, I just wanted to give a shout out. If you're not already involved in the Cloud Software Association or a member of, I would please invite you to go to cloudsoftwareassociation.com. Go ahead and enter as a member. There's fantastic membership benefits. And really, the organization is designed to help leaders in partnerships and teams to really come together and have a collective voice around running partnerships, ecosystems, channels, primarily in high tech and fast growth SaaS companies. So with that, and we also have an event also coming up in April that I'll invite you to attend and join in as well. But enough of that housekeeping stuff. Let's get into the fun part. And again, my name is Jason Breed with Crown Peak. And also with the Cloud Software Association. And I want to give a warm welcome to Shilpi Kapoor, who's the CEO of BarrierBreak. And Shilpi is just a renowned international expert in this topic of digital accessibility. And so happy to have her here and helping us talk about this topic, which frankly isn't a topic that often gets brought up outside of the product team typically, right? And so we're going to talk about accessibility and how we think about this and bring this into our ecosystems as a whole, as part of an entire partner play within companies, because it's hugely important and also, honestly, hugely valuable to the companies who get it right. So with that, Shilpi, would you please introduce yourself and just give us a brief background of kind of how you got into this space and what BarrierBreak is doing?
Firstly, Jason, thank you for having me here, and thank you for working with me on this webinar, because like you said, it's not a topic that's often talked about, very often forgotten, but needs to come front and center as we go ahead within the technology ecosystem. So thank you to you as well as Cloud Software Association for having me here. Before I start, I actually want to say that when I came across this association, I actually was shocked that there was an association like this that existed. And the Slack channel is something that I find quite vibrant. So happy to be a part of it. And thank you again for having me here. So, shout out to all of you who are doing the great work here. So I think coming from there to your point, I think I'll talk about ourselves and what we do as we continue to get into this conversation. But the question that you asked is, how did I get into this? And I'll just give a very short peek into that. I actually started out of college back in 1993, wanted to do something different, landed up in an internet chat room and learned how to hack. Became an ethical hacker and got hired by an American firm sitting out of India to look after their servers. So it was great fun. It was great work. It was great money, and it was really cool work. And while I was doing this, 2 years after working with this company, one of the days that I was on my shift, and I was working with my boss at that time, and I caught the hacker and he didn't. And I actually asked him, I said, what happened? How come I beat you to this game? Because you taught me everything about hacking. And he turned around and told me, he said, the only reason you could do this was because my technology is not doing very well. I'm waiting for a technician to come in. Just so that you know, I'm paralyzed neck down, and I use a sip and puff device, which is using his breath to control his computer. And that just blew me away. Went from there to start the first ever computer training center for the visually impaired in India, and soon realized I didn't want to be a charity, and thus the genesis of BarrierBreak as you see it today. So that's the shortest way to get that story out there. Right.
We can unpack that whole thing in a series. That's fantastic. Thanks, Shilpi, for that. So let's kind of jump in here. I would say let's start first by jumping into just let's talk about what digital accessibility is. And kind of how we think about disabilities and people living with disabilities in the overall context of all this.
Right. So I think when we talk about the overall context, and I actually, think back to when I started off, one of the first things that I realized in that time was that I had a bias. Right. My bias was I never thought people with disabilities could be as good as me, as fast as me, or could be as efficient as I thought at that point of time, because I always assumed that, like in the case of my boss, somebody who was paralyzed could not do what I could do. Right. And that was me then. And fast forward to today, I now see that that is actually not true. So we have 1 billion people with disabilities globally, right? 1 billion plus, which is actually one of the largest minorities in the world. So when you actually look at a number of 1 billion plus and you look at all of us as businesses, I don't think we can ignore 1 billion plus people as such, right? So I think that's the first thing that, when I started working in the space, I realized. The second thing that I started to realize was that, all of us look at people with disabilities as them and look at them and say, oh, this is not about us, this is about them, right? So I don't have a disability, they do, right? So during this period of COVID, I went and, could not see my screen very well and landed up going to get my eyes checked and realized I had near and farsightedness, both of them. Now, actually, that's about being low vision. And today, one of the biggest things that I use is pinch and zoom, right? And Zoom is one of the biggest things that I use on my system. Now, for everybody else, it's like, oh, that's not really for me. But actually, that was created for people who were low vision. It was never created for you and me. But invariably, it's you and I who are using it, right? So somewhere I started to realize very early on that there were synergies where all of us at some point or the other will experience some kind of disability. Maybe it might be age-related. Maybe it would be before, right? So when we always talk about disability, we always talk about, people who are either low vision, blind, people who are deaf or hard of hearing, people who have physical challenges. Those are the obvious things that come to mind. But there's so many of us who actually have invisible disabilities, right? Disabilities that we can't notice. Like you can't notice, somebody in my organization who's deaf till you realize that they might need a sign language interpreter, right? So I think the biggest difference that you start to see is that you start to realize when you work in disability that it is so much wider than the concept that we talk about, which is why I love the word inclusion rather than anything else, right? So, it's 11:30 at night in India right now, and I had to keep myself awake, and I was watching television, and I was on Netflix, and before I realized it, I was using subtitles, right? And I was using captions. So much of what we do is actually about inclusion. But even then, a lot of us look at people with disabilities as outside our world right? And we look at it as it's happening to somebody else, it's not happening to us. But when we start looking at the way that we interact with the world, we start to realize that we are doing so much of the same things or using so much of the same, solutions, and especially when it comes to tech. Right. And that leads me to my next part, which is, it's just the disposable income that people with disabilities have, which all of us within the tech world are ignoring today. So, an 8 trillion number of disposable income, which is there with people with disabilities, is huge, right? And they're starting to...
Right?
Right.
Trillion with a T.
Trillion with a T. And it's making those decisions today for you, right? Because when you work with a company that is talking about being an equal opportunity employer, and if their systems aren't going to be accessible, then how are they going to be an equal opportunity employer, right? So there are so many cross sections to this whole conversation, and I'm sure you all are doing so much at Crown Peak yourself, right? And I'm sure you all are seeing that from the side of organizations building digital solutions, etc. Yeah. But I can tell you that over the last 20 years that I've been in this space, the last 5 have been where inclusion has really taken front and center, right? And, I'm hoping that the SaaS community takes that forward too.
Yeah, I would agree. So let's unpack that just a little bit, just to be like real precise on this. So and by the way, I'm a complete goofball. I pulled the wrong deck that has this little thing in here, and I completely apologize for that, Shilpi, because you deserve only but the best and most professional stuff here, and I screwed that up. I just used the wrong deck, so let me apologize that officially. But so. Yeah, what I heard you talked about when we talk about disabilities, we talk about visual, auditory, right, hearing. We talk about motor and cognitive, right? Or like that movement of the body functions, which it doesn't have to be permanent disabilities. It could be somebody who broke their arm and they're in a cast for 6 weeks. It could be, right, so it could be temporary disabilities as well as, what we think about is, people with permanent disabilities only, right? Okay, so that's important, I think, to understand. And then if we just talked about as we get into digital accessibility here, so how would we kind of define that? And maybe I'll just put something out there. To me, this is like digital accessibility is really about providing a like for like experience of somebody who is non-disabled, in like for like with somebody who's living with disabilities at the time or even permanently, right? Is that like take that, like my perspective, and is that a good way to look at it, or is there something else that we should add in there?
I think that's a perfect way to look at it, right? Because that's the way that we are going to get everybody else to start looking at it. Right. And to your conversation on temporary disabilities, I'm going to add another word to that. Situational, right?
Oh,
so an interesting way to look at it is, you're driving the car and you have your Google Maps speaking out to you, right? At that moment in time, situationally, you can't see your screen because you need to be actually watching the road, right? And in that given situation, you are going to use, speech output and listen to that and work with that. So I think that's the additional mix I would add to what you thought about.
Awesome. And that one is huge. To me, that one's huge. That fantastic. Thank you, Shilpi. So I think we've defined it pretty well and find the importance of it. Maybe we jump into here a little bit of like, you know, when we talk about the ecosystem, like what do we include in here, and talk about like why it's important and the components of, you know, when we talk about the ecosystem, what are the components of that make up areas we should be looking at for inclusion here around digital accessibility?
Right. So since all of us work in the SaaS space, I think the first thing that you start over doing when I look at it is start with making your own house accessible, right? And that starts with making your own products accessible, because that's the core of all of our businesses, right? So the first step is make your own products accessible. Accessible to people with disabilities, because sometimes the word accessible gets assumed to be access as in reach, right? In this case, to people with disabilities. So if we start with making our own products accessible, you know, then it's about that we're automatically ensuring that our customers who might have employees with disabilities or might be a person with disability themselves could also access our solutions, right? It might be that we might be selling to the government, let's say it's federal or state, and they would surely have a requirement to ensure whether the product is Section 508 compliant, let's say in the US. So it's about ensuring that our customers also know that we are taking this path and thus giving us the benefit of that solution, right? When we talk about Cloud Software Association and you look at your partner networks, and all of us have such a wide range of partners, and this partner network also needs to ensure that they include you know, people with disabilities and solutions around that, right? When we talk about the people, I think none of us as organizations can function without them. When you have a pool of 1 billion plus people that you can hire and actually build an interesting, diverse mix of people within that organization, you'll automatically start to find that differences bring about a lot of, you know, varied conversations, different ideas, which come to the forefront. So when I talk about myself and BarrierBreak, 65% of BarrierBreak is people with disabilities. Right. 65%. And yeah, and we're a team of about 250 people today, right? And what's most amazing is for all of us, it's not personas when we design solutions. It's about, you know, person X requires accessibility, or how would this person see this image or this graph? You know, how is Dawn going to look at this you know, tab panel, and how are they going to interact with it? So when you start thinking from that perspective of actually bringing people front and center within your team, and they start adding value to the product because they also are end users of the solutions at most times, that would help you take that conversation a lot further, right? Which then takes me to processes, right? And you know, when we just think about it, today solutions like Zoom and Teams, all of them have concepts like live captioning on them, right? And you can switch on your caption, and if you can't understand my accent, you will yet be able to interact with what I'm saying thanks to live captioning. So if you started to build all of those kind of things into your processes and gave people the choice to utilize some of the cool technology that accessibility is bringing to the forefront, you've got a winner again, right? And last but not the least is communication, right? When we are all investing so much in building inclusion and diversity and accessibility, why wouldn't we talk about it? Why wouldn't we communicate it to our internal or our external stakeholders? And how do we ensure that that conversation reaches the right people and access to technology reaches the right people, and that we can include them and thus build an inclusive culture around it. In the last couple of years, we're seeing so many companies who are standing for whether it's social causes, whether it's environmental causes, etc. And there's an amazing organization in the US called Disability In, and they are actually signing up CEOs to be front and center and saying, we stand for accessibility and inclusion and diversity, right? So today when you have, let's say, a Microsoft or a VMware or, a Google which stands up and says, we are going to build inclusion, and we're going to build it, not only into our people, our processes, but into our products. That extends to all of us, right? Because we're a part of that same ecosystem, and we're using so many of their solutions or extending so many of their solutions. So I think the interesting part about this is that, while we build accessible technology, as organizations, we can push the boundaries of inclusion. Right. And I think that's something all of us want to do, because we just don't want to sell technology, and we just don't, want to make good money, but we also want to be able to give back. And as tech companies, what better way to give back than to make your own technologies inclusive and spread the love, if I might put it like that.
Yeah. So 2 points here, right? Of why, and the front and center one is just a good thing to do, right? You open up your world to a large part of the global population, and the second, and oftentimes the reason why we make decisions in business, it's good business value, it's good ROI to have inclusivity at the core, and for the reasons you mentioned on your slide before, $8 trillion value there of why to do, right? So it's good to do, and it's good business to do. And the one point here, so I love this point about culture, right? I mean, all the components in there, and all that's nice. And frankly, some people treat it as just checkbox items, right? But when you think about it from a cultural perspective, and I've talked about this on prior webinars and things about how Crown Peak approaches our ecosystem, our partners. When we're reviewing partners, we actually have a culture slide that says, we act like this. So if you act like this, you're probably not a good fit. But if you act like this, you're a really good fit with us, right? And we put that front and center. That's one of the first things we push out to prospective partners, to say that, here's what we believe, here's how we act. Customers always first. And so one of the things I will go back and revise in here, because I don't have it, is that we are an inclusive culture. Like that's fantastic. And as much as I'm in this business, it never occurred to me to have that on our slide to talk about that, because we already are. And my expectation is everybody is, but it's great to call that out. So it's not just a little checkbox thing like a Vpat that maybe we'll talk about here in a second, but it's a way we work, not just some of the things we do as a result of that, right?
Very true. And I think, as long as you talked about ROI, right? And one of the largest customers that all of us are reaching out to is federal and state, right? Sure. And procurement becomes one of those key things for all of us, right? So I think, your point is bang on when we're talking to partners, because I think it's very critical, because we all work with people who have similar values, right? We all first, focus on that before we even go down the path of signing non-disclosures and agreements and things like that. Yeah. So why not start from there? And I think that's where sometimes we lose out, because we don't talk about this part of us, right? this part of us which resonates with lots of people. And you'd be shocked, Jason, at the number of people that I've met. And when I've said I work in disability, and then they'll turn around and tell me, you know what, I have somebody in my family, or I have somebody on my team who actually has a disability, but I just didn't realize it, or I didn't even think about it. And it's interesting how it lands up joining so many different people together within that conversation. And sometimes it's just the small things, because it's about empathy at the end of the day. Right? And especially in these times with COVID, et cetera, and all of us talking about mental health and all of this, it all kind of comes, back to just culture.
Sure, absolutely. And to think that, oh, we're not affected by it. I don't have anybody living with disabilities, at our work, or that I know of within my partner ecosystem. Like, all of that we just said is false, because if you know 8 people, one of them is living with a disability, right? I mean, like, the law of average says that somebody and many people is living with this, and whether it's like you said, situational, whether it's temporary or permanent, we're all living together, and we need to live together in an inclusive world.
Can I ask everybody a question here? Nobody needs to answer, but let's see what they think about this, if you don't mind. So do you use word prediction on your phone? Right. If you do, you're using a tool that was created for people with dyslexia, right? But you and I are using it. Now, if you're somebody who uses pinch and zoom, or uses Zoom on your browser because you can't see the text size on that website, you're using something made for low vision, right? If you use a keyboard like I do, and you tend to be a great keyboard user, you would use the F and the J to put your hands so that you can, work through your keyboard. Or if you use Control+S to save and don't use your mouse, you're a keyboard user as much as I am. So I think, if you just start realizing that it's all of us in this together, and if you just ask yourself those questions, and then you think about your products and your solutions that you're creating, and you say, oh, you created this product, and yes, you can use it with the mouse, but you've created a save button or a keystroke for save, and everybody's saving it because, with using Microsoft Office, all of us are used to pressing Control+S at everything, right? And we just do that. It gives people speed, it gives people efficiency. And you soon realize, oh, it's not that different. The dark mode that you see on mobile phones today, it was created for people, who had either low vision or colorblind. So just start to think about that. And I think those are questions that when people start to realize that they themselves are using it, culture becomes a little easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I thought low vision was created for my kids who like to game at night. So
very true.
Shilpi, let's cover off on. Let's do a couple things here. And Matt, thank you for your note there. And you guys are certainly heavily involved in this space. So I'm thank you for attending, and thank you for being part of the discussion here. Let's talk about some of the drivers that are kind of acting as a force function for companies and products and now ecosystems to start thinking about why I need to be inclusive. And then we'll kind of jump into what I consider the fun part is talking about how to bring all this together and create an environment that truly is inclusive and how some different examples of that. Okay.
I think, whether I like it or not, the first thing where people start focusing on disability or accessibility is because of the law, right? We would love to say, do it because it's the right thing to do it because it's ROI. But we do know that reality states that, the first thing that people look at it is compliance and the legislative requirements. And today the legislative requirements are, globally there. So if you are a company that wants to focus, wants to work in the global ecosystem, whether it's the US, UK, Canada, European Union, Australia, everybody has a disability law. And I think disability law is now a given because it's about discrimination, right? It's about creating an equitable access environment for people. So I think, every country today has a disability law. So I think if you are working with governments, or you're working with state, or you're working with corporates who are looking at their laws and looking at it, then they would look at that space. On the other side, let's look at public procurement, right? So so before I get to public procurement, like in the US, you've got Americans with Disabilities Act, right? It is something as a law which exists in the US. Right? Now, as a law, we say that we need to ensure that websites and mobile apps are accessible to every individual, and we're not discriminating against. Today, you've got lawsuits that happen. A very famous one that we've all been following is Domino's, which is which got sued because somebody couldn't order a pizza online. You don't want to take that approach, but I think that is the stick that very often gets people onto the accessibility bandwagon. And then slowly they realize that they need to get to the other side and look at it as a carrot rather than the stick, right? But the laws are surely there for all of us to think about. On the public procurement side, it's every country today is emphasizing that we will only procure things that are accessible. So in the US, we've got Section 508, right? And Section 508 basically states that, federal governments will not procure unless solutions are accessible, right? And this has been a law for a long time. But I think lately it's getting more and more focus, right? Especially in the tech world, and we're starting to take it a lot more seriously. Similarly, in Europe, we've got EN 301549, right? So I know this is a lot of jargon, which is why this slide. And luckily for all of us in the tech world, the world is coming to harmonize on disability, right? So the laws and the standards are actually the same largely globally. They might be called different names, but generally they all stand under, they all adopt or adapt standards that exist, right? And one of the standards all of us work towards is the Web Content Accessibility Guideline, which is by the World Wide Web Consortium, right? So I think what we've got here is, we've got a sweet spot as tech companies, because if we make our solutions accessible to, let's say, the US market, they automatically would also become relevant to, the European markets, or to UK, or to Australia, or to India for that matter. And I think that's where you can really take the same solution globally and use the same regulatory requirements and standards and guidelines. But I surely do believe that the global drivers are one that are pushing companies to seriously take on accessibility, right? And once they do, then they start looking at, how do they make their tech processes better? How do they train their people? And some of the good stuff that you said, which is coming in the next slide. But I think from a global driver perspective, it's about the laws, standards, and the policies in place.
Yeah, fantastic. And so, so what I like to see actually is that there are some laws here, because everybody knows it's the right thing to do, but everybody knows it's the right thing to do, like to stop at a stop sign. But sometimes people are in a hurry and they run and they take a chance of getting a ticket for running a stop sign, right? So these are all in place to protect us as a society. So I'm glad there's laws in place to address this and bring it to the forefront. So, all right, let's jump in and talk about so now what, or the so what, right? of this, and what do I do about all this? And so let's talk about like a framework around inclusivity and what we can do around our entire ecosystem and the way we think about partners, and maybe just to kick this off and why it's so important. At Crown Peak, we have a scanning tool, an automated scanning tool that looks over all kinds of digital properties and then itemizes or inventories the things that meet accessibility requirements and the things, more importantly, that don't meet accessibility requirements. And you can do that if you have thousands of sites or whatever. You can do that very easily, very quickly, and it's a good kind of a kickoff point to add in like BarrierBreak, who would then go in and actually do the remediation work, right? So the importance of having a ecosystem that all comes in line under inclusivity. So we have a number of customers, and these are some of the largest global consumer goods companies who have thousands of presence in thousands of countries, in thousands of languages, in hundreds sometimes of products in all these countries and languages also. All right. And what they've done is said inclusivity is so important to us that in order to do work with us as an agency, as a designer, as advertiser, whatever, all of your work has to meet a certain set of criteria. Okay, so we have put the Crown Peak solution as an umbrella over all of their digital properties. And in order to work with them, you have to meet, let's say a 7 out of 10. Okay, and so when you think like, this probably doesn't apply to me, unless you want to work with one of those of the largest CPG companies in the world, then it will matter to you of how you think about inclusivity and accessibility for your products and all the people around you that you work with. So I just want to put that out there as a prime example of a company that takes inclusivity really, across all the people who work with them or who want to work with them as a priority. And I don't think this is one example, but I think this is becoming more and more and more, like Matt said, table stakes and not a differentiator in how people want to work.
It is a must-have today, right? I think that's a given in this space. So, to your point, without solutions like what you're talking about that Crown Peak has, people struggle to maintain accessibility. So actually, accessibility is really something where, it takes automation as well as manual effort. It takes training as well as processes on the other side, right? To bring it all together.
And to your point, it's a journey. It's not a point in time. It's a journey, yes. Right?
Yes, and it's continuous. Mm-hmm. It's not even a journey that starts from today and ends 3 months later on your go live, but it continues, as you enhance your product, as you add solutions, as you add features, as you go on. So for lots of people, they look at it and say, oh, Shilpi, can you help us do an audit? And, it's a one-time thing. And what they forget is they put in all that effort and they get things right. And then 2 years down, they've gone and undone everything that they've done, which was fabulous, right? And they again have to start off from zero. So that's where the roadmap really starts to kick in, right? I think the first thing, and I think this is true to anything that as organizations we start off, right? We all create vision boards. So why not a vision board for accessibility, right? We all sit down and create, plans and roadmaps, etc. So why is accessibility any different, right? So whenever we ask customers and we say, let's help you define your accessibility vision. And we always tell them, start small. You don't have to start with saying you're going to be there. I know companies who've been striving to make things accessible for the last 10 years, and they're yet striving to make things accessible, right? I can tell you, if I go onto my own company website, I can probably do a better job today than I did yesterday, because I'll say, oh, I could do this better, right? And it is a journey along the way. So it starts with the simple things, defining your vision, right? Where do you want to be? Which standard do you want to meet? Which guideline do you want to meet? By when do you want to get there? What is the process that you're going to put into place to monitor that vision, that you are reaching your target, etc. All of us, like you said, a large number of the organizations have so many digital assets today and properties. It's no longer about just one website, which is, your company website. It's your internet, it's your HR portal, it is your support site, it is, your career website. It is about your employees having access to a community portal of their own. It's about your CRM, etc. So we have so many different digital assets out there. Take stock of that, prioritizing it, looking at where do you want to start, what do you want to focus on next, right? Seeing whether you have the right skills in place. Sadly, we notice that a large number of technologists out there, accessibility is not taught to most of us. I learned accessibility on my own, right? And I know so many of my peers who have. But it's important for our designers, our developers, our product managers to understand accessibility and learn that along the way. And if you don't have it in-house, bring in people like us or Crown Peak, whether it's BarrierBreak, whether it's Crown Peak, so that we can come in and help support along that journey, right? Conduct accessibility audits. You spoke about automation, right? And all of us know that when it comes to accessibility, so much of what we do is a combination of automated testing as well as manual testing, right? So one of the things that we say in BarrierBreak is that we include people with disabilities as a part of our manual audits, right? Not as user testers, but actually as accessibility auditors, right, who have been trained in accessibility, because there are so many things that you need to do a manual check on, right? So if I have a photograph of you on your website and it says, image of Shilpi instead of image of Jason, it's going to be, somebody needs to go and see whether that image description is effective or not, right? And there's so many such checkpoints where we have to do a manual check per se. So automation helps us scale, and manual helps us ensure that we deliver on the quality along with automation and bring those two solutions together, right? And when you're doing all of this hard work, there's no point just doing it one time. How do we help you embed it into your processes so that it's repeated? It's not there only till the day that Shilpi and Jason are there within the organization. It outlives us. It continues within your product, and you start to see the value of that outcome. And then, it's about getting the right information to your customers, right? And one way to do that is to create a voluntary product accessibility template. And I'm going to underline the word voluntary out here if I can, right? It's not a certificate. It's actually your voluntary disclosures in an organization saying that this is how accessible is your solution. And it's okay if your solution is not fully accessible, but it's just about disclosing it and saying we have a roadmap. We are going to move ahead within this, right? And I think that is something that customers of yours and mine are asking us today.
Yeah.
Do you have a Vpat when they're buying from us? And I think that is where it is. It's important to communicate where you stand today, right? As well as then to talk to your customers about what's your vision and where are you planning to take your solution, because that's what's going to get you your buy-in. An interesting anecdote, we work with this education institute in California, And they had to go out and procure edtech software. What they did was they shortlisted their top 3 that they came down to. And they finally came to us and said, can you evaluate these 3 and tell us our top 5 important things that we need from this are these. Which of these 3 are most accessible when it comes to those 5 points, right? And they actually made us audit before they finally procured. They found the gap, right? And they went to the organization that they finally worked with and negotiated and said, you know what, over the next 1 year, we know you're not there, but can you ensure that you make this, and this accessible? And they agreed, and they got a deal, for 10 years with that, university. And I think that's the interesting part on how you can convert it into an opportunity rather than a stick, right? And finally, obviously, monitoring. We are all businesses. We all thrive on numbers. Why not? How are we doing on the accessibility matrix?
Absolutely. That's fascinating. So where from what you've seen, where are people in the process here? What do you think?
Well, sadly, 70% of yet are at the stage where I already have my product. Can you please test it and give me a Vpat? So they're coming in very late, and we need to bring them in a lot earlier within the solution, right? And I think the SaaS ecosystem has an opportunity, because this is yet, for want of another way of putting it, this is yet a new age technology solution kind of companies. We don't have so much legacy as much as some of the other tech companies would.
Yeah.
Right? Because, one can say this is the last 10, 12 years that SaaS has really reached the scales that it is reaching. So I think this is where if we start to bring accessibility right in at the time that we're conceiving a product, right at the time that we are designing our first wireframes or our first prototype, and start from there rather than, oh, we've got go live tomorrow. Shilpi, can you please test this product and give it to us in 24 hours, which is not going to happen. But, we get a lot of those inquiries, right? And sometimes you get them as in, we went live and we got, these 20 emails that came to us. Now we are in a problem, and how do we solve? So I think it's going to be time for people to start looking at it from the vision point and start from there. But today, large number are at, we've got a product in hand. Can you make a Vpat for us?
So let me just kind of shape this in maybe a way from a partner perspective and in the world that I look in today. And the Scott Brinker map of, I don't know, there's a gazillion companies in there now, or something, north of 8,000, right? At least. and there's probably 30 companies in any one of those categories, or maybe even more, right? And if you start talking about how do we get our own house in order and be an inclusive company, that sets you apart in your grouping, right, of all the other vendors in your space. And from an ecosystem perspective, how cool would it be to go to companies and say, not only do we have best-in-class solutions and all of our partners are great products, right, that we surround ourselves with, but it's the only completely inclusive ecosystem on the market that you can get today, right? The Walmarts of the world, like everybody would gravitate to that messaging. And right now it is unique. I think it will become table stakes, but right now that messaging is unique in the space. So it's just as a way to differentiate yourself and differentiate your partner ecosystem and the way you do business. This is why right now is the time to act in having an inclusive mindset from your culture, from your product, from your people, from your partners, and bring it all together and shout from the top of the mountain that that this is what we believe in and this is what we're doing in the market.
True. And that's why, Jason, differentiator it surely is, and must have it will become, like you rightly said. Yeah,
absolutely. So I'm just trying to check here. I don't see anything that we've not covered off in the chat. And just let me ask, are we missing any questions that came through? Because all I can see is the chat right now. Are we good?
I think so. I can't see anything in the chat window or QA window.
Okay, fantastic. So Shilpi, as we start to think about kind of wrapping up here a little bit, will you just tell us a bit about BarrierBreak and what you guys do and how some of the folks running these businesses in the SaaS environment could use BarrierBreak?
Thank you so much for that, Jason. So we are an offshore accessibility consulting firm. Interestingly, we were the first ever accessibility consulting firm in India. I am always proud of that because we started the conversation on that in India. We're about 250 of us. We provide end-to-end accessibility solutions, whether it is doing an audit on your product, whether it's just a one-time audit, or going down to the point of creating dedicated teams of accessibility professionals that work with you and your teams within it. We today work with a large number of SaaS companies, helping them create their Vpats, helping them set up their accessibility vision, as well as setting up the tracking and dashboards to help them measure their progress. We also help people train their teams. But one of the best things I think about us as an organization is we help bring the value of the understanding of disabled people, because 65% of us are people with disabilities ourselves. So we actually bring that conversation right to the front and say, these are the challenges. And it's something I always talk about, because it's important that when we do these audits and when we look at our processes, we consider the users, because at the end of the day, it's the user base that we want to increase. That's our customer base that we're going to add to. And that's the conversation we're going to have to talk to our partners, to our customers, to help them understand the differentiator per se, right? So feel free to reach out to us. We are supporting 80% of our business comes out of the US. So we are used to working with organizations in the US and work in all kinds of SaaS products, from HR tech to ed tech to CRM to just some cool technology, as well as some DevOps companies that are looking at accessibility also. So, if anybody within the Cloud Software Association would like to reach out, and hopefully looking forward to even working with you, Jason, in some way or the other, as we align on these values of accessibility and inclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you. So just to wrap that up, so DM is it at Shilpi Kapoor? How are you in the Slack channel?
So I think I'm Shilpi Kapoor at Shilpi Kapoor. Okay.
So just search for Shilpi Kapoor and you'll see the ad. You can DM her and get a hold of BarrierBreak and take advantage of some of the great things that they're doing. So just as a quick wrap up here, thank you so much for having this very important conversation with us. This is not a conversation we talk about, we hear about a lot in the partner in channel ecosystem, things we do on a daily basis. So it's fantastic to have this conversation here. It's hugely important, as we've talked about. And I hope that people will be inspired at least get one thing out of this to take back and start to do just a little bit differently, just to be a little bit better than we were yesterday. As just a quick wrap up here, please, if you're not already a member, check out cloudsoftwareassociation.com. We're the only association for partnership leaders and partnership executives to come together and have a collective conversation and solve some of the collective problems that we face in our daily tasks. So please go become a member, and also check out the Cloud Software Association, the conference we're holding here coming up in April, SaaS Connect. It is a wonderful, wonderful event, and certainly you can get some key things out of there to take back and implement immediately. So take advantage of that. With that, Shilpi, any last thoughts?
Just thank you to you, Jason, and to the Cloud Software Association. I know this is not a common topic. I know it's not one that brings in a lot of crowds. So really, really appreciate you looking at this as well as focusing on this, and looking forward to being a part of the Cloud Software Association.
Fantastic. Shilpi,
thanks
so much for taking your time. Please go get some sleep.
Thank you. I am going to.
Thank you so much for being part of this and helping us through this conversation. To everybody at the CSA, thank you very much. And we'll see you soon next week and the weeks after in our webinars. With that, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.